evening. Welcome to our next Connections midweek speaker series. I'm your host, Nathan Mish, Pastor Nathan here at Epiphany Lutheran Church. And last week, if you joined us, we had Reverend Dr. David Kim, who was connecting for us how important it is, even in the midst of a pandemic, to be about following Jesus and making disciples in this world. This week, we're joined by Dr. Tomika Greer and Jonte Greer, and we're going to be making some connections between our life following Jesus Christ and something that was brought to the forefront, at least most recently in 2020, that our nation has struggled with, and perhaps even more than struggled with in the recent past and beyond that, and that is racism. And tonight, we're sitting at the feet of Dr. Tomika Greer and Jonte Greer as they help illuminate, put light on this subject for us. And I'm excited to have you all with us this evening. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. Matter of fact, why don't you just say hi, make sure your audio is working for everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, people.
All right, this conversation, if I remember right, really the genesis for this sort of interview started way back middle of last year, even earlier. As I was thinking about it, it was like mid-May, late May, early June was really when we had the first conversation. Like, hey, we really need to talk about this at some point in the near future, and get this out to the congregation. Am I remembering that right?
You're probably right. I want to say it was warm outside, so maybe June-ish.
Right.
I mean, that narrows it down in Houston, sure, but
Yeah,
I think
right.
It was around June.
Well, I think the event was the George Floyd, actually the funeral, and then that whole situation, if I'm remembering that correctly. And so, like 6 months later, we're here. Not 7 months later, we're here to talk about really the state of things and where we can go forward. And so how we're going to do this tonight is, after talking with y'all, the way y'all wanted to do this was basically we're going to go over 4 points. The first point is just a short history of racism in USAmerica. And the second point is current kind of constructs that I might not be aware of, that folks with my skin color might have a challenge seeing, but need to see. And be made aware of. The third thing we're going to talk about is actually your own personal experiences with racism. And I appreciate y'all being brave enough to share those with us here online. And then finally, we're going to talk about next steps. Really, where can we go from here as individuals listening to this, but then also as congregations? We're part of a gathering of churches called the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. I won't explain the name right now, but essentially we're talking about this also. How can the church, as a part of that synod, move forward with some of the resources they've provided and some resources outside of that? So I'm looking forward to getting this started. We do love to start with prayer when we have these conversations, so let's go ahead and get started with a word of prayer here. Father in heaven, we thank you for the wisdom of Dr. Tomika Greer and Jonte Greer as they spend some time with us this evening. We ask, Father, that you would bless our conversation, that you would be with us as we tackle what can be a challenging subject. We know, Lord, that you desire your people to be a people of peace, to be healers, to be people who restore rifts and who treat all people equally in your Son, Jesus Christ, who, when he came, he made all people equal. There was no division now, that we are all one when it comes to our relationship with you and how you see us under him. So we ask, Father, that you would use this conversation as a starting point for healing. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So spend some time talking with us a little bit here. We're just going to hit point number one. Define racism. There's a lot of different views on what quote-unquote racism is. So give us a starting place, kind of a foundation for where we can talk about this from.
Good. So racism. The general definition is going to be a differential treatment or treating people differently based on the racial group that they belong to.
Right.
Okay? But then there's also another definition of racism that kind of builds on that, which is, I think, where people kind of start to get a little fuzzy. And it is the very beliefs and attitudes that people hold about members of different racial groups. And it's not just that we recognize those differences, but the racism is that we then use those differences to establish social hierarchies. So some groups are inferior, some groups are superior based on those different characteristics and qualities that we attribute to different races. So that's what racism is. Racism can occur at an individual level, like I said, in terms of individual beliefs and attitudes towards people in different groups. And it also occurs on a systemic level through the structures and policies that are in place to replicate and perpetuate that social hierarchy between racial groups.
So, one of the things that you said there that just kind of resonated with me was taking something that was good, the differences, the uniqueness, how God kind of inbuilt this incredible uniqueness and way of viewing his creation, viewing the world, viewing life and doing life. And then taking that and then twisting it into something that is all of a sudden, like you said, now all of a sudden we're using this as a place of like demarcation, of building kind of walls between cultures, subcultures, to a place where your value, your worth as a person falls along those differences.
Exactly.
Not what
exactly.
makes people it's like so if you're the same, you're worth more than if you're different. Which is whoa man, how scary is that? But how like typical of Satan and our broken world to take something that's good and then just absolutely twist it into something that is evil. It's just like that. That's awesome. So keep going with that. So that's our definition.
So that's our definition, and we have to remember that, as you said, Pastor Nathan, race is a man-made construct. This is not something that was put into place on the foundations of the earth. This is something that man created in order to establish hierarchy between people, right? And so we have evidence of the use of the word race as early as like the 1400s is when that started being used. And really it was a justification to enslave people and to commit genocide, right? And so if we can establish that people that look a certain way or have a certain skin color are inferior or worth less, then we can enslave them or we can justify killing them.
Right. We can even push aside those things that like kind of culture things that we're, say we believe in order to, do this thing we want to do, even though our culture says one thing. If we kind of say, no, they're not a part of our culture, they're a different culture, they're something, sub or other.
It was okay.
Yeah.
It's now
and
okay.
So in the early days of slave trade, like Europe to Africa, those really, really early days, that was the justification. There's these people with dark skin down in Africa. They're really good workers, but they're like savage beasts. We've got to tame them. We've got to teach them about the love of Christ. Let's bring them here and make them work, right? And so it was under this guise of the gospel, of teaching these savage, dark-skinned people from Africa how to be Christian. So that's exactly what you were saying. Yeah.
Right. It is terrible. The technical theological term is exegesis, but it's terrible theology too. That isn't necessarily driving it, but it's allowing it to happen. And so there's a level of, okay, as you're talking about here, going, okay, we need to do some work looking at our kind of where we're at. Because it's easy, as your brief history pointed out, to be able to kind of have the larger culture say, well, we want to do this. And then people who would normally not do that then are like, well, they kind of want to do it. And we can see the quote unquote benefits, even though that's, not the case, holistically. So we'll go along with it, and we'll kind of ignore this part, or you got to reinterpret X little part to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So by the 1700s, there we had like this published hierarchy of races where they were, this guy said there are 4 races based on skin color, and he had white, he had yellow, he had red, and he had black. And the hierarchy was in that order. So white was at the top, white was supreme, and white was defined in terms of the way they looked: white, fair skin, blue eyes, blonde hair. They were very, very smart, very inventive, and very cultured, right? And then the further away we get from white, so as we go to from white in Europe, to yellow in Asia, to red in what is now the Americas, to black, which we know as Africa, the further we get away from white, the worse characteristics those people had, right?
Really?
Yes. Yeah. So for instance, the yellow people, they're stern, but they're greedy, and they're ruled by opinion. This is what I think, right? The red man is ill-tempered. They have thick, straight black hair, a harsh face. They paint their face, and they're ruled by customs, right? And then you get down to the black people, and he describes them as sluggish, lazy, black kinky hair, flat nose, thick lips, slow, careless, and ruled by caprice, right? So they are whimsical. There's no rhyme or reason to the things that they do. And again, now we justify we have to save them.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was in the 1700s. Now, obviously, we have expanded from those 4 races back then. But yeah, that's what. And so when you hear me talk about the characteristics that they ascribe to those 4 groups, you hear some of the same stereotypes, right?
Yeah.
In 2021 about these different groups of people. So everything that's happened in these 300 years since that typology was published has worked to continue to keep that structure where white is on top, and the further you get from white, the more inferior you are.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about those structures then. As you guys are seeing it, as you've experienced it, the research that you've done, what structures kind of sit in place? And I'm going to kind of divide this up into two parts. The one structure is sort of like secular, and then we'll talk about the other one, quote unquote, sacred within the church.
Okay.
Let's split those up that way. In terms of the secular world, what kind of structures are we talking about?
So I'll briefly talk about that, and then I'll let Jonte jump in on the church thing. So briefly, in terms of structures that perpetuate this racial hierarchy, you can narrow it down into two really. First is laws,
Okay.
right? The government. Okay. We started with, obviously slavery was legal.
Right.
Here in the United States. Then it was abolished, but it was abolished and replaced by the Black Codes, which basically meant Black people couldn't own land and still had to work.
Right.
And were punished if they didn't work, or if they broke that work contract or whatever, right?
Okay.
Or they were sent to jail for things that weren't even real crimes except within the Black Code, so that they then became prison labor,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And so that kept them still in that servitude.
Okay.
Right. So those laws then, they were erased off the books, but it became the Jim Crow laws, right? So then they couldn't vote, and so the laws that have replaced the ones that we decide aren't good, they still continue to perpetuate those structures, okay, even to today. And the other place is in educational institutions. There's a whole school of thought about how really access to quality education is one of those things that keeps those structures in place, because it's not equitable, right? And a lot of what this country is built on is that when you are educated, you have certain opportunities available to you. Well, what if I can't get educated, right?
Right. So as I'm hearing you say that from a secular perspective, I'm just kind of putting this, kind of, I guess, reframing this from as I'm thinking about it. it wasn't like, all of a sudden slavery's abolished and the culture changed.
No, these mindsets, these attitudes are the same, right? The former slaves are still inferior people.
Right, because you're not changing culture overnight. You're not changing minds and hearts overnight. As a matter of fact, you're not really even changing culture from the top down, which is what was tried with, when you're talking about abolishing slavery. You're trying to change that with the top down when, like you said, well, okay, so at the federal level we've changed it, but we're just going to continue the institution. We're going to continue the structure of this.
Exactly. That would be the structural racism. Absolutely.
At the local level, whether that's in our homes or at the city level or the state level, the county level, whatever it is, it's still being perpetuated decades after the end of the Civil War. Yeah.
Absolutely.
No,
Absolutely.
that's great. And so from an education perspective, is just out of curiosity, as I'm following up on that, is that because of like socioeconomics that's the case? And I don't want to dive too deep down that rabbit hole because we could spend a lot of time there. But are we talking about socioeconomics that are a fallout of that decades-long kind of slow shift away from slavery, or talk to me a little bit about that?
That is going to play a role, and unfortunately, that's generational, right?
Yeah.
So if your previous generation was of a certain socioeconomic status, it's going to be extra hard for you to be in a different status. Yeah, to move up out of that. And then there are gatekeepers in education that like things to stay the way they have been, right? And you even think like it was 1954 when we decided that separate educational spaces couldn't actually be equal. So for half the time since slavery, we were like, well, separate spaces is great. Everybody's getting the same thing.
Right.
No, they're not, right?
Right, but that goes back to this idea of trying to change things from the top down still. So you change educational spaces. So, okay, the laws are abolished. We've changed the laws at the top.
Right.
But
what happens when the housing laws didn't change? So we still can't live in the same neighborhoods. So we still can't go to the same school because we zone the schools.
Right. So all of a sudden now it's like, well, that's great, but there's this whole other structure over here.
Right.
That's still dealing with it. There's so much tied into this together.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is why it's hard to pinpoint, like when you ask about socioeconomic status, and it's like, but that's part of the whole pot, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the chicken or the egg.
Right. And in some ways it doesn't matter because it's still talking about this. You're still talking about a whole kind of cultural structure.
Right.
That it doesn't matter where you start. You got to start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
In some way.
And we end up where we are in different levels, superior to inferior.
Right. Even though, you could point and say, but we did this and we did this and we did this. If you're talking about from the dominant cultural perspective.
Right. But what difference, what impact did it actually have? Did it change your attitude? Does it change how you see people that look different from you?
Right. Which is why ultimately Jesus.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because,
yes.
I mean, when you're talking about, even from a secular perspective, the only way that true change is going to take place is if minds and hearts are changed.
Right.
If we're changed from the inside out. Because as we're talking here, and I know I'm getting ahead of us here a little bit, just a smidge, but just kind of foreshadowing where we're going with this idea of, if you change things from the top, it helps. I mean, I'm assuming that that's that helps on one level, but until you change hearts and minds from the inside out, the top down change is it sounds to me like it's somewhat superficial. Is that
Yes.
Is that
I think yeah.
It's just not as impactful as it could be.
Yeah. I mean, maybe
Because of
superficial is the wrong word. I think that might be the wrong word, but the idea is there's not going to be true change. And you guys know this.
Right. Which is why we're in a cycle, right?
Yeah.
Once we think we fix one thing, some other new issue arises, but it's the same issue as 1492. It's the same issue.
Right.
So
just with a different name on it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just to switch to the sacred side of things, that's the secular side of things from the last most of the history of the United States. From a sacred side, then, how does this work in terms of church structures? This is a little harder for me to hear, I think, being a pastor. So, okay, ouch, but we need to hear it. So go ahead and let's talk a little bit about sacred structures.
Man, that's hard. So, I know. From the, within the church, obviously, and this is established by God Himself, so it is not supposed to have these type of problems within God's people. But church is made of people, so of course we're going to have sin, we're going to have these problems. I think in the church, because it's coming up in this culture, let's say in North America, so we have the church growing up and trying to reach, minister, and do their work within this.
Right.
Well, now you've got these people separated with these views, and I'm supposed to try to spread the gospel and minister.
Right.
And you have people with these attitudes, attempting to do this, to do the work of Christ. And I think what's happened, and I'll jump ahead in time, trying not to jump ahead with what we're going to talk about, but the Lord drops you in what He considers as your ministry field, where your mission field, where you're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And if you are somewhere you don't want to be, or your church is somewhere where you wish it wasn't, that's not my mission field. That's not where I want to do the work. I think I want to go here,
right,
instead. And I don't want to jump too far ahead as far as how that's impacted the Synod. I think from USAmerica standpoint, it really, really has. And me growing up in St. Louis, the headquarters, with our all of our historical Lutheran churches there have been impacted super hard, by this.
Yeah.
But you have, we're trying to get men and women, through whether they're going to the seminary or some other type of theological training, mm-hmm. and where the resources being spent on getting the people getting everyone equipped to be able to do what I believe God has called them to do. Right. Are we having the resources with these with other digital ethnic ministries,
right?
Other folks that maybe they just don't look like them. So with that, again, because we're separated, it makes it a little bit harder makes it take more effort, to get to know these people and to go and interact. Just don't, because it's easier. So from a church standpoint, from our ministries, and I'll speak specifically with USAmerica, that's what I'm most familiar, even as a lifelong Lutheran, growing up in the church, you could tell just where resources are allocated, again from the top down,
right? And
then we would have instances where, like, well, no, we do need to change this. So we have a Black ministry within the LCMS. We have and then try to expand that out. We actually had a historically Black HBC, an historically Black college, Concordia Selma, that was created for that. That just closed.
Yeah.
It was the only Lutheran HBCU in the country. It was the last one. Yeah. And that closed, I want to say, at the end of the 2018 spring semester. Yep. So now you have that again, and I'm saying that was closed because the Synod obviously wanted to close it. And we just talking about just years that was around for about almost 100 years of
right.
Where are we putting our resources? Where are we putting our effort? Are we really supporting everyone, to the amount that we need to?
Right. And
answer is no. That closes. The other ministries suffer. And I want to say right now in 2020, we don't have a black man that entered seminary for 2020.
Right.
That's a scary, and again, anybody else knows. That's a scary place to be.
Right, because if as we're training folks to be a part of ministry and to engage cultures, either cross culturally or native culturally speaking, if it's only people who look like me, then what does that say about where we're headed?
Right.
So I mean, like, from that perspective, that's a hard word. It's a good word, but it's a hard word because at some point we're saying, are we putting our money where we say we want it? What we value essentially as Synod. And that is a bigger kind of conversation than we're having right now, for sure. But at the same time, are we putting our resources to what we say we value as God's people? Which goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Tomika, which says, are we, it can kind of be some top-down stuff going on there, but when it comes down to brass tacks, if you will, what's going on? Yeah.
Because here's the thing: if you don't think it's worth it, or that particular group of people are worth it, or you don't have a heart for them, then you can't really spread the gospel to them.
Right, and that does mean doing hard work, because in my own research about cross-cultural and ministry, when it comes to reaching across cultural barriers, significant cultural barriers do matter. I mean, there's some serious stuff that has to be dealt with when you're talking about crossing cultural barriers in ministry. But that doesn't mean the structure ought not change in order to meet that.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Because that's what I'm hearing. That's kind of what I'm hearing said here is like, do we need to take a serious look at our structures, synodically and locally, in order to, who are we reaching? We've talked about this. This is brief, and I do want to move on to the next thing. We've talked about, do we look like the community around us? And
yes.
And that's a nice kind of, at least in my own thinking, and I don't know if that resonates with y'all. I think it does. But for me, the way that resonates is it forces me to look at the community around me and say, well, do we? No, probably not.
Yeah.
And that's a hard. And then you start doing perhaps the hard work of saying, how do you change? Yeah. So I'm going to pause here for just a second and say, so we're about 30 minutes into this. I knew this was going to be a long conversation. We knew this was going to be a long conversation, and that's okay. We're 30 minutes into this, and we're not going to stop the conversation right now. But for those of you who are listening, who are spending your evening with us, first off, thank you for joining the conversation and being willing to enter into this. The second thing I want to say is, if you've got any questions for Dr. Tomika or Jonte Greer, for us, you could put those in the live chat, especially if you're watching on YouTube or through the app. You can put your questions in the chat bar on wherever that is. It's different if you're on the app or on the website. Wherever the chat bar is, you can put your questions in that chat bar, and we'll be more than happy to get to them once we're closed this evening, or once we get to the end of our brief conversation on this topic. All right, so part number 3 then. We've talked about structures. We've talked about history. We've talked about secular structures. We've talked about sacred structures that are inherently racist, or seem to be racist, or tend towards racist.
I like the first way you said it. Inherently racist.
There you go. So we've got those structures. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about y'all's personal experience from this, because we could talk about the structure, and it's important, but that structure impacts real people's lives.
Yes.
And that's the thing, and that's where we're coming back to it. This is that,
right.
It's one thing. It's this theory or this structure that's nice, but it has a real impact on real people for whom Jesus died. Right? So, tell me a little bit. I mean, y'all are brave enough to share some of these stories. Tell us a little bit about your own experiences. I know y'all have something of a different experience with this, or at least different experience different facets. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Part of that is because we grew up in different parts of the country, and then part of it is because he's a man.
Yep.
Right.
That's so much.
And
sorry.
Go ahead, Tomika.
Yeah. Okay. I can do that. So when I start to think about some of the occurrences or experiences that I've had, I instantly think about the first time I remember vocalizing anything about race. So I hear some parents saying, "Oh, the kids don't see color, blah 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 blah." That's not true. Everybody sees color. Like, unless you are literally blind, you see that there are color differences in skin tone. So I remember I was 6 years old, and I was living in Ohio, and my mom told me we were moving to North Carolina. My very first question was, are there Black people there? Because that was the scary stuff, right? And I wasn't sure that was a place that we needed to go. I actually didn't have any real experience with white people at that point in my life. So it was a scary thought to go to a place where, in my head, Black people didn't even live. I remember my mom said to me, she was like, "Yes, there are Black people there," almost to just calm me down. I'm 6 years old. And I remember getting there and being very relieved when I saw that she was right. There were actual Black people there. So that's my first recollection of acknowledging and having conversations about race. But obviously before then, I was very aware that I was Black and there were other people that didn't look like me that existed. I just didn't have personal experience with it. Okay. And so we moved to North Carolina. We're looking for a home. My mom wants a certain house. The realtor will not show it to her because people that look like us don't live there. She showed her all kinds of other kind of rundown houses that were kind of outskirts of this neighborhood, but she wouldn't show her that house. My parents switched realtors.
Yeah.
And we ended up buying that house. We were the first Black families to ever live in that neighborhood. It was not easy in the early days playing with other kids in the neighborhood. I had a friend that I really liked. We would talk at school, but her parents would let me come into their house. And one day she fell off her bike. We were riding bikes. And they knew she was with me, but she fell off her bike. I walked her back to her house, her legs bleeding or whatever. And they shut the door in my face because it was my fault that she fell. I did not push her. She fell off her bike. I was being a friend. I walked her home. They wouldn't let me come in and they shut the door in my face.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, cool. We never spoke again. We never played again. At school, she told me she wasn't allowed to play with me. Right? So there's that. I'm probably 8 or 9, maybe, something like that, when that happened. Yeah. And the town that we lived in, it's important to note that not only were we the only Black family in that subdivision, we actually lived in a town that was divided by a railroad track. Okay. So on one side of the track is where the people that looked like me lived, and then on my side, it was us in our house, right? So that was, it was interesting. And I was a relatively smart child. And my mom fought to get me tested for the gifted program in the public school there. Okay. And that was a battle. They had never had anybody look like me to be in the gifted program. And so the first time I tested, I did not pass. And it was because the tester read the questions to me. I was already having a hard time understanding the Southern dialect when I moved down there. She read the questions to me. I did not pass. My mom fought to have me retested, and I read the questions myself, and I had a perfect score.
Wow.
So that was another example there. And then that same year, first grade, I remember the teacher called home to my mom, and she was basically almost disciplining my mom about, mom was relatively young, but about making sure I get enough sleep at night. And my mom's like, my child goes to bed at 8 o'clock every night. Like, that is a non-negotiable. What are you talking about type thing? And she's like, well, she puts her head on the desk all the time. And my mom was like, that's because she's bored. Give her something that challenges her. So I remember my mom started sending me to school with work that she assigned to me. So I would do the teacher's work, and my mom told me not to lay my head on the desk, to then do the work that my mom sent me to school with. So that was like my mom's solution to kind of mitigate that stereotype of, again, sluggish and lazy, right? Even in the school setting. Right. So those were the kinds of things like early on. And so then as I continued to grow up in that town, I was often the only person that looked like me in the spaces that I was in, because of being in the gifted program, because of going to a magnet middle school where I was bused across the city and those sorts of things. So it was a constant battle of, oh, wow, Tomika, you're so special because you're Black and smart at the same time. And I'm like, no, there's lots of smart Black people. But that was the mentality. Like, right. You're some special gem and the rest of your race is nothing like you. And it's like, no, actually, there's lots of really, really intelligent Black people.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those are some of my early experiences, like through like high school. So.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I got you. Jonte, you also have some experience with this. Could you tell us a little bit about yours?
Yeah, so I'll start as high school. I'm a little bit older. So
2 years. Go ahead.
No, I'll start when I'm a little bit older when you start.
Oh, okay.
Telling you the stories.
Okay.
Anywho, so the summer after my sophomore year in high school, I attended a scholars academy. Missouri. Grew up in St. Louis, went to Lutheran High School North, and counselor there says, hey, I think you should apply to the Missouri Scholars Academy. Never heard of it. Went there. Long story short, the whole program is designed for like the top 0.5% of all the sophomores in the state. Mm-hmm. So I had to take an IQ test just to get in. So take the test. I love the program. It was great there. I remember this is about the time you start really thinking about colleges, and I met a group of half a dozen or so, other Black kids, Black sophomores that went there that were from the general St. Louis area. So we all became close. It might have been several hundred sophomores there, kids there, and they had a college fair where we get a chance to talk to these recruiters that were coming in to kind of introduce us to the college life and start thinking about applying and all that other stuff. Well, that was the point where I got introduced to Washington University in St. Louis, which right. is obviously a really expensive, private, prestigious school in the city. Mm-hmm. And 5 of us went and talked to the recruiter there, and told us about school. Like, oh, this is great. And we have a debriefing afterwards, and they ask all the kids, okay, who do you speak with, and how do you talk to, just kind of again to kind of guide them. So the 5 of us are sitting there and says, man, we talked to the Wash U recruiter, and man, we really like that school. We like how it sounds. And to a person, the woman who was supposed to be our guide for this told us all, that's a really competitive school. Are you sure you all want to go there? Mm-hmm. And we looked like, well, yeah, it's a good school. I mean, they sold it, and then the recruiter did their job, right? Mm-hmm. So when she was like, it's just so competitive for y'all. Are you sure that's really want to? So again, we're taking this and we're looking at each other like, did you have to meet the same criteria I did to get accepted into this? But so we're all at the top of our class, in these schools, and we have this woman telling us, we're shooting for too high a bar.
Right.
And obviously we were all offended, but I think we took it well, just took it as well, she doesn't hold, but she's not the gatekeeper of how we can get there.
Right.
So long story short, what I think was completely, either call it poetic justice or really ironic, all 5 of us wound up going to Washington.
Wow.
All 5 of us graduated.
Wow.
4 of the 5, potentially 5, went there on full academic scholarship.
Yeah.
So that's the part that I thought was so ironic. I was proud of my friends. These are, one of some of my closest friends that I've had my entire life. Mm-hmm. But I remember just being told that, no, that's too good. That's too much for you. Mm-hmm. So you have that. And okay, so fast forward, I get out of, I graduated college in 22. I'm actually coming back from Chicago from visiting Tomika. She was in Chicago doing an internship. I had just graduated, still had a month or so before I started a new job. I'm driving back down I-55 in a traffic jam, and I noticed a police cruiser that's kind of behind me, and we're going like 15 miles an hour. I mean, traffic's just horrible coming down. And he pulls up to the side and didn't think much of it. And then I watch him just start to go behind. He forces his way to get directly behind me. And after a few seconds, throws on the lights and pulls me over. So he basically pulls me out of the car. He tells me I was tailgating in a traffic jam. We're doing 10 miles an hour. And I'm guilty of tailgating. So he says, I pulled you over, but I have no idea. Right. And the whole time, I have no idea where I am in Illinois. I'm just going down the highway just trying to get home. And the only thing that popped into my mind is what my mother told me growing up was there are going to be people that don't like you because of the color of your skin, and will try to get you into trouble or trap you. And she kept telling me that the phrase, don't give them a reason.
Right.
Just don't give them a reason. You be respectful, you mind authorities. Obviously growing up, especially as a Christian, you submit to the will of Christ and all that. So you're taught to do this, but don't give them a reason. Do not give them a reason. Right. That's what I'm thinking in my head as he's pulling over. Don't give them a reason. Yes, sir. Here's my license. Here's my registration. Here's my insurance. He asked me to get out of the car. I have to get into his cruiser, and he then proceeded to barrage me with a bunch of questions. I'm a new WashU grad, so I just stuck the WashU alumni license plate cover back in my car, and he looks, oh, you went to WashU or Washington University. What's that? Where's that? What'd you do? And he started just hitting me with all these barrage of questions to prove that I went to the school. Right. And then he asked me, well, why are you so nervous? And I was like, I'm sitting in a policeman's car for tailgating. I'm a little nervous. And his partner goes through, and he goes to my car. He goes through the front. So we want to check your car for everything under the sun. And he goes to my front, my glove compartment, my back seat, my trunk. Mm-hmm. I don't know what he's looking for. And he says, well, your car fits the description of what could be used, what some people use to mule in drugs into the state. So, just been racial profiled. But it's like, do not give them a reason. I just need to get home. I do not, this is the days before social media. Yeah, I had no cell phone, I had no pager, right. Had no ways of getting in contact with anyone. This is the summer of 1999. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, I gotta get out of here. But I cannot, everyone has the way that they deal with prejudices, and some people are a bit more militant. I know my rights, and I'm not going to let you. And that just wasn't me. And I was just like, do whatever it takes to get home. And I was driving a 1997 Dodge Neon, so I don't know what type of mule car people were going. I don't know if I should right. Impress because like, oh, the Neon. Okay, I guess that's what the drug dealers are using. Or be embarrassed because, oh, it's the Neon. I guess that's what drug dealers are using. So that was it wasn't my first experience with the police, thankfully, as far as like first time. But that was difficult. It just was. So
right.
Can I follow up on one thing that he said?
Yeah, for sure.
When he talked about the college recruiter that tried to talk him and his friends out of going to the university that they ended up going to,
Mm-hmm.
her that response of, well, that's a very competitive school. Okay. I can see it. There's different ways to take that. So
Right.
she may have absolutely thought she was helping these teens make a good decision.
Right.
But the comment stems from her attitude and belief that these Black teens were inferior and therefore not competitive for this school.
Right.
Right? So that is what we would call a microaggression.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So it's something that's everyday conversation that the person saying it themselves may not realize that it is a racist comment.
Right.
But that's exactly what it is.
Right.
So another example that also happened to him, he's at work and a guy says to him, I don't see you as a Black guy.
Right.
What does that mean? That means I see Black guys through this lens and they meet this stereotype and this is what they're like. You're nothing like that, right? But I would hear it. I'm going to put myself in his place. If I'm listening to somebody say that to me, I'm offended as all get out.
Right.
Because every day when I look in the mirror, I see myself as a Black man. What's wrong with you? Why don't you see me that way? It's because you think it's a compliment now to say that you don't see me as Black, when that is one of the most salient parts of my identity. Mm-hmm. So for you not to see me as Black, you just erased me off the earth. That's what you just did. Right. And it's a racist comment.
Right. It is a, like, ultimately it for all the good it may have been intended to, it says, well, culturally that doesn't matter. Like who God created you as a person to be.
Right. You just took that away.
Yeah.
You just
put that to the side.
Yeah.
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 So that's and I didn't even get a ticket. So.
Oh yeah. Finish the story.
Yeah. They said, oh, okay, get back in the car.
Yeah.
Have a safe trip.
Yeah. There is, I mean, as I'm hearing y'all talk about that, one of the things that I think about is how much, at least for the follower of Jesus Christ, how much, like, our conversation, our attitude, like my conversation, my attitude, would need to be bathed in prayer in order to be able to see some of these things. Just simply because I'm thinking about the comment that you received, Jonte, from the recruit, as you're on the recruiting trip. I'm thinking, from my perspective, it's like, well, if that were my parents, they're like, man, do you really want that stress? They're like, if this is right. Like, do you want that stress? Do you want this? But, that's just from my perspective and how I've grown up in this culture. I would, until you said that, I would never have seen it that way, but I need to see it that way. Mm-hmm. That's where my eyes need to be opened like that. When you're talking about, that just was one of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking. I'm going like, oh my goodness, what have I missed? Or what have I done? Sorry, in one sense, because there's more here than just simply, there's more to this than I was giving credit for. And so this is part of why I'm loving this conversation, because I'm getting to see stuff that I had not seen before. And so it's opening my eyes up. I do want to go to a last point here. Now we got 9 minutes. Well,
now what do we do? Yeah,
what do we do? We'll take the time we need to take. But I'll tell you what, one of the things y'all wanted to spend a little bit of time chatting about was next steps. I mean, we've gone through kind of the history of it. We've gone through some of the cultural structures that are in place, both secular structures and then sacred structures or church structures. Y'all have talked to us a little bit about your own experiences. And now I just want to finish the conversation before we get us some questions. What I want to see is, what are some next steps we can take? like my eyes are being opened. Like I got to start listening differently. I got to start, seeing things a little bit differently. I got to step out of my own shoes is one, kind of thing I'm getting from this. But what are some steps that y'all think would be valuable for someone like me, for the church, for individual congregation members, for people on either side of this to begin taking steps forward for healing, to bring the healing of Jesus Christ to bear on this?
I mean,
I
so
got the secular stuff.
Oh, okay. I mean, well, you said it. I mean, the answer is Christ and is love. I said is to defeat this, it takes love.
Right.
And God is love. So this is only done through God and his power and his grace upon his people. And coming from the Christian, at least from my viewpoint, the Christian viewpoint, this is something that I believe the church as a whole should be right at the forefront of as far as battling this, because one of the things that we should acknowledge is, again, from a Christian viewpoint, racism is the result of and is sin.
Right.
It just is. Acknowledge that it exists. Acknowledge that it's sin, something that we all do. We're all sinful. We all need forgiveness, and we all have that offered to us through Christ.
Right.
So that's kind of always my starting point. Is like, okay, the answer is Jesus, obviously.
Right.
So, as a follower of Jesus, okay, now what will he empower you to do? And like you said, there's a lot of challenges with this. We're in a fallen world. This world on this side of heaven is never going to be perfect. And there's a lot of challenges. I take heart that it's not on me, it's not on you, it's not on us. We have a victory already through Christ, so it's letting God be God and do his work with the Spirit. So, like, personally, I think it goes with when we're reaching out to people and talking to people, it's listening to understand.
Okay.
And it's that communication is key in understanding. I think what a lot of from prejudices, microaggressions, or whatever, that stuff, a lot of that stems from lack of communication or misunderstanding, and a lack of empathy. And I think that's really a huge thing. From a heart standpoint, that's why it's love, because that's a change of heart, and only Jesus can give people that. So when you're talking to folks and you're listening to their experiences, you're just listening to understand, trying to figure out how can you support your brother or sister in Christ. If you're, like I said, from your background, you're just trying to learn, kind of while we're having this conversation here, and I really appreciate it, of listening to understand. Being, if you're in a position of authority or influence, being an advocate for those that don't have one. Being a friend, I hear a lot of, we have allies, and we need allies for this, allies great. I don't want an ally, I want a friend. So be my friend. That's I think that goes beyond just doing the right thing, for the right thing's sake necessarily. It's you're displaying love for people. I think getting involved with different organizations. She brought up the whole I don't see color thing, and people would take that again different ways as far as what they think they mean by that. It could be, well, I really mean I just don't see people in a negative light with color and whatnot and things like that. Well, I remember years back in a previous job, I was involved with an organization that we actually went out to bring out and celebrate our cultural differences. Again, the way God made us, the way God has shaped each person. And we brought that out and we celebrated different cultural ethnicities, from one side, the Gulf Coast, is littered with all these different folks here, and they're coming here, right? So the mission field's here. So I had a chance to bring out, learn more about people and their different cultures, and have dinners, and again, have fun with it. Everything doesn't have to be a drag. And that was awesome. So that's, things have that. We have speaking out, when you do see that. And that's probably one of the hardest things if you do see something that's questionable or you hear something that's questionable from someone, and it takes courage to speak out and say, that's not right. And to call someone out on that. Again, speaking the truth in love. I don't mean the browbeating, don't Bible thump. I mean, speaking the truth out in love. That's where you get that understanding from both sides, where you say, okay, I'm saying this, but I'm saying this because I love you. I'm saying this because I don't think you're viewing this in a way Christ would have you view this person. Again, this is someone that Jesus died for and loved dearly, just like you. So, so you have that, and I missed it. I should have said the first thing, but I do believe from Christian, staying in the Word is key. Because if you're in the Word and you hear what he's saying, and he's told you how to treat your brother or sister, and how to treat the foreigner, and how to, in your land, and all that other stuff. Yeah. I'm not saying you can't help, but it'll change your heart. But at least you can't help to hear what God's saying. You know what you're supposed to be hearing as an individual. So that's from an individual standpoint. I can get into.
I just want to say
our church body.
Yeah, you can say, yeah. I just want to say real quick, because I apparently have a lot to say, is racism is one of those things you can't be neutral about. You can't be lukewarm about, right? Because, as we've already established, the structures in which we live, the systems that we have created in this country are inherently racist. They are favorable to some races over other races, right? So if you choose to not fight against that, if you choose to not ever question the policies and practices and procedures and programs that are in place, then you're basically perpetuating that racist structure. So it is racist structure, or you are an active anti-racist, which means you actively work to disrupt that status quo, which is racist. Go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking about Jesus's ministry. Jesus ministered in a very culturally diverse area of Judea. Where he ministered, you had Jews, you had Samaritans who were considered half-breeds, who were less than, who were kind of cultural scum when it came to Jews, and then you had Greeks who were even worse than Samaritans, or at least on the same level as Samaritans. The part of the Judea that he spent most of his time ministering in was inherently cross-cultural. And one of the things that we see Jesus doing, he doesn't blow them away those cultural differences.
Right.
He acknowledges them. He says, he knows that there are culture. He even uses those cultural differences in order to do ministry. I think about the woman at the well, for example. He knows that he goes there, he's going to find somebody very, very unusual, someone who is not, the upper crust of society. And so he breaks all sorts of barriers between men and women, cultural barriers, racial barriers, language barriers. I mean, ultimately, when it comes to the Gospels being translated across multiple different languages, I'm thinking about what you're saying, Jonte, about all the different languages that are spoken in the different cultures that are here in Houston. There's 200 and I want to say there are 200-ish different languages spoken in the Houston area on a daily basis.
Yeah.
200. Yeah. I go, holy cow. If we're, what an incredible opportunity to be an advocate, but also then to be a friend and to be that person who is saying, I'm going to do the hard work of reaching across cultural boundaries in order to not just advocate for the one who is being disenfranchised by, culturally speaking, not just to be that advocate, but more importantly, I would say eternally speaking, but more importantly, or alongside that, to bring Jesus with folks for that ultimate healing. That then empowers a whole new group of people then to be those advocates, and it just kind of works its way forward.
Perpetuates that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that is a conscious effort.
Right.
That is active.
Yeah. Right. No, you're absolutely right. It's not going to come Well, it's like I was reading a book, and there was a quote. How I don't remember the guy who did it, but he was given the address, the commencement address at like I think it's Singapore Technical University or something. It was in like Singapore where he's doing this, and he says, "Guys, here's what I want you to do. I want you to love another human being. You may think this comes naturally, but it does not. Our culture is anti-love. And it only takes one reason to not love someone. It takes acceptance to love that individual."
Yeah.
So there's a level of, well, as he said, he's saying it takes active work to do that.
Yes.
And so as you're saying, we're talking about loving our neighbors. I mean, really, in one sense, that's not to boil that down too small, but at the back of that is Jesus' command to love our neighbor as ourselves.
Love our neighbors, exactly.
Yeah. I know y'all, I've been watching some of the conversation a little bit on the live chat, but you did answer one of the comments that we made or we had there. I did want to ask you a question though before we go. Do you ever feel the need to act differently around your white friends as opposed to your black friends?
So definitely, I definitely do. There is probably lots of reasons for that, but
Okay.
the big part of it is I was socialized to do so.
Right.
So if you think about some of the stories I told growing up,
Mm-hmm.
that was teaching me that I needed to act a certain way when I was around certain people, right?
Right.
And then white people are usually the gatekeepers. So you you have to be acceptable in order to walk into those gates. Whereas when you're with people, with black people in my case, people that look like me, people that understand my experiences a little bit better, who we share common cultural artifacts and that sort of thing,
Right.
there's less of a need to feel like I have to try to suppress any part of me
Right.
than with people that I assume don't completely understand every part of me.
Right. Okay, so there's a comfortability and a kind of, I'm hearing a relaxedness
Yeah.
that exists there. Is that right? Am I hearing that right?
For me, yeah. I don't know.
Go ahead, Jonte.
I'm sure I do. I mean, I asked her, like, do I do that? She's like, oh, God, yes. So it's probably for me, it's more subconscious now than anything. I don't think it's something I'm trying to do. And most of it's probably just still with letting your guard down. I guess when I'm around, and I'm thinking specifically, real close family, friends, or real close friends and family.
Right.
Where that happens. And again, it's just the space that you're in.
Yeah.
I think part of it is, when I try to think of this, is like one of the things I think we can do, again, from our side, if you're the victim of racism or racist policies, is that on our side is also about reaching out to our fellow brother and sister as well. So it takes reaching on both sides to do this. And one of the things where I've noticed it, but it's a good thing, but it's, I guess it just is so at one of the reasons why I love Epiphany, and I'll give a plug to our church, Church-Pearland, is we are probably the only black family, not the only black family, but we're one of few. However, since we've been there, the church has loved my family since we've been there. And my kids have grown up there. That is their home. Our congregation is there. That is their church family. That's their friends. They've known them since the oldest was 2. The little one been there her entire life. And it takes that type of reaching out. And I think since that's been my church home for so long, me getting more comfortable in that setting, and that just for me being able to propagate that familiarity or that comfortability in professional settings, work settings, with other friends, and that's so I kind of spun it a little bit on how that can be helpful.
Right.
Not so much the changing who you are with folks, but again, what is this the is where I've been placed right now. This is where God's called me to be, at this moment. So I'm going to embrace that and I'm gonna rock with that, and see where He takes me.
Right.
And so just again from our setting within Epiphany, that has been something that we do not look like our community, but the fortunate thing about our particular church is that love is there. It is a matter of getting out of our comfort zone and reaching across and doing what is necessary to love the folks around us,
Right.
and showing them that the love of Christ, or who's walked in this community of faith, and it can be had there, and we want to reach people with that. So,
right.
But yeah, I've definitely had to do that in the past. Just that old is what it is type mentality or saying, but it happens.
It's mostly unconscious, but it happens.
Well, I'll tell you what, one of the things that as I'm listening, as we're closing this conversation, it sounds like, we need to be in prayer that our eyes are opened to see the community around us, see what we're doing, and to see how we can, as followers of Christ, like we started the conversation with, like, how can we begin to be the healing that our God has designed us to be as followers of Him, even as He healed us at the cross. How can we be that healing? So, Jonte, Tomika, I really appreciate y'all taking some time out of your evening to just chat with us, to be real with us, to help us, at least me, and I'm assuming a great many other folks who will watch this, help us to begin to see things a little bit differently, and then also to make changes, substantive changes in how we operate, in order to begin that healing process. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, Pastor, I really appreciate you reaching out to us and giving us the opportunity to speak. And it's been fun. I mean, it's hopefully educational for everybody, but it has been fun. Hopefully, it's something the start of something new and exciting for us on this journey. There's just so many resources that even within the LCMS, within the Senate that we can utilize. I think it's just a matter of getting the word out. People just don't know that they exist, but there are people out there. There's Bible studies, there's books, there's it's all kind of, and I don't have time to get into any of that, but
Right.
I'd really love to.
Well,
but anyway, but like I said, as a start, as far as starting a conversation and putting a spotlight on it, I do appreciate it.
I'm sure we're going to have I'm sure we'll talk again about this at some point in the near future. So,
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Y'all have a wonderful evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight for this, or whenever you're watching, daytime, midnight, whenever you're watching this. Thank you for joining us, and God bless as we continue to follow our Lord and Savior Jesus the Christ in this as in all things. Take care, and we'll talk again soon.
Take care. Thank you.